This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. This is episode number 271 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer. I'm glad you're with me. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're back. And I hope you'll take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. And, you know, in this particular episode, I'm kind of veering away from what I typically do. Most all of the episodes that I do, the majority of them are interviews that I do with people on different aspects of private practice on both the business and clinical sides of things. But in this particular episode, I wanted to share with you just some topics or some things that have come up in my work with people in both my group practice focus group and also the practice launch club, and just various questions that come up around, you know, how we evolve in our practices. And also wanted to share with you just some of the mistakes that I've made along the way and get kind of vulnerable with you, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and not make your own. But that's what this episode is about, is just the evolution of private practice and thinking about how your practice evolves, and also just sharing with you things that I wish I had done differently in the past, but am maybe doing now, but I wish I'd done differently early on. And so just want to share those things with you because I felt like it was a pretty good topic, particularly since those kinds of questions come up in these in the consulting I do, but also in the practice launch club and the group practice focus group that I have. But before we get to that, one of the things that you probably, if you've been listening to the podcast over the last few episodes, you've heard me mention an upcoming course that I've put together, or we're putting together with my friend James Marland, and it's going to be a course on podcasting. And so one of the things about that course, really, as much as anything, I got some encouragement from some of my friends and other colleagues to put together a course on podcasting, because one of the questions also that I get from people is, you know, how did you start your podcast? What all is involved in starting a podcast? And so that's what the course is going to be about. But before you delve into enrolling in the course, one of the things that I would invite you to do first is enroll in a free mini course that James and I have put together on the 4 reasons to start your podcast in 2023. So hopefully this mini course will get your wheels turning. And when you sign up for the free course, it's an email course, and you'll get 4 different lessons. And I'll tell you ahead of time, there's a bonus lesson there if you sign up, but 4 different lessons on why you might want to start a podcast, or if that's something that you've been thinking about, and how podcasting is really changing the face in which we share content with people. So anyway, I invite you to go over and check that out. And you can get to that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/start podcasting. And that'll get you to the landing page where you can sign up for the free mini course. But also just to let you know, I've got a full course coming out. April the 21st is what we're planning to do. And it will be a live course so that you'll get to interact with me and with James Marlin around this whole topic of podcasting, and we'll take you from the A to Z of podcasting. So if you are interested in just signing up and cutting to the chase on that, you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/podcasting course. Practiceoftherapy.com/podcasting course, and that'll get you to the landing page for that. So looking forward to doing that. And thanks for the encouragement I got from a lot of the members of the Sightcraft Network, which you've heard about in the intro here. And also that brings us to a good segue here for you to hear from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes, and also one of the members of the Sightcraft Network.
Hey there, Daniel Fava here, and if you don't know me, I'm the host of the Private Practice Elevation podcast, where I share online marketing strategies and interviews to help private practice owners attract more clients and scale their businesses. The Private Practice Elevation podcast is part of the Sightcraft network of podcasts, and I'm super excited to be a part of this network alongside Gordon and the great work he's doing. If you haven't discovered the Private Practice Elevation podcast yet, you can find it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love for you to join me as we explore topics like building an effective website for your private practice, search engine optimization, content marketing, and copywriting, as well as my conversations with experienced private practice owners about scaling a practice, outsourcing, team leadership, and all things that will help you elevate your business and create the life you love. Be sure to check us out at privatepracticeelevation.com for resources and content to help you in your online marketing journey.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, when I started thinking about this particular episode, I'll be quite honest, part of it is I had a little bit of break in the interview schedule. And so I wanted to get another episode out. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to delve into a topic that I've been thinking about, and just really from listening to other people in the Sightcraft network and also just other people in general, just around this whole idea about how our practices change over time. One of the things that when I started my private practice back in around 2005, 2006, somewhere in there, I can't keep up exactly when I started my private practice because I started part-time. I was still working for an agency at the time, and was mainly working with children and youth and their families. And so my private practice really focused on adults, and particularly marriage and relationship issues, which was a different niche than I was in the agency that I was working for at the time. But when I started into private practice, where I am now, looking back, I never would have dreamed that I am where I am now. And so one of the things that I would say is when you start into private practice, one of the things you can expect is that it will evolve. So, for example, I went from a solo practice into a group practice, and I never really thought I would get into group practice. But what I figured out along the way was that was kind of, as we like to call it, a low-hanging fruit for really taking my practice to the next level and also creating more income for myself within my practice. And so back in that around 2014, I was supervising a person for licensure, and they were needing extra hours for to get their hours in for their licensure. And so I had gotten to the point where I was starting to get pretty full with my practice. And so I brought, it was Amy at the time, Amy on as a person within my group. And so it was an informal group. We were really just kind of operating independently. But one of the things that we were doing is just sharing resources at that particular time. We were sharing the cost of an office. We were just sharing, I was giving her referrals and she would give me referrals. But we were really operating pretty independently at that time. And so later it kind of evolved into starting a group practice officially. And so I formed an LLC that's Kingsport Counseling Associates, PLLC, which is, not to go down too far down on a rabbit hole, just means professional limited liability company. But anyway, formed a group. And so I brought on some other clinicians, brought them on as contractors. And one of the things that I learned through that process, which again, that's a good segue into maybe some of the mistakes that I made along the way, is that as a contractor, I was actually having them as contractors, particularly what I was paying them, I was losing money and didn't really realize it at the time. But one of the things that I learned over time was that mistake I made is that I was kind of picking what I was paying them kind of arbitrarily without really knowing my numbers. So number one that I would say that I learned from is not spending time on the front end when I started my group practice of really understanding my numbers. And two things about that is that one is having an understanding of what you need for yourself. My friend Casey Compton, and on a recent podcast episode that she did with Whitney Owens at the Wise Practice podcast, she talked about, referred to it as lifestyle congruence. In other words, what is it that you need monetarily to maintain the lifestyle of your practice and also your personal life? And so that's something that I think people need to put some thought into on the front end of really understanding what it is what is going to fit for your lifestyle. There's really no perfect size practice. I think you have to build your practice based on what is going to work and fit for you. I know for me, in my practice, I've made a decision to kind of keep my practice small. Some would consider I'm probably a small to mid-sized practice. I've got 6 clinicians working for me plus an admin person. And so that would be considered probably a small to mid-sized practice. But I made that decision just because I knew what my bandwidth was when I made that decision. And so I didn't want to just create a large practice beyond that. So I think, and also it just really fit with my lifestyle in that, when you take on more people, when you take on more things in a practice, you have to outsource more and you have to really be aware of your time commitment to all of those things. The other thing kind of related to lifestyle congruence is thinking about how you tend to go about accomplishing tasks and doing things within your practice. Typically when a person starts out into private practice, the one asset they've got the most of is their time, depending on how you start it. And one of the things that in those early stages, it makes sense to do some bootstrapping. In other words, doing a lot of the work on your own in terms of getting your systems and processes in place, in terms of marketing, in terms of making appointments, all of the things that are involved in setting up a practice. Doing those on your own is makes sense to do it in those beginning stages when you've got more time. But as you grow and you start taking on clients or taking on patients, that's when your time factor kind of comes in. Your time becomes much more valuable at that point through seeing clients. And so one of the things that I made a mistake of is trying to maintain kind of that solo practice mentality, and also just that beginning bootstrapping mentality for too long. I wish I had outsourced more sooner. And that was one of the mistakes that I made, in that I tried to be the everyone person for my practice, and it got overwhelming. And what ended up happening is I started noticing that things were falling through the cracks. I would forget to do things. I was missing things along the way. I would finally get around to returning phone calls, and people had already scheduled with somebody else. So those are the kinds of things you have to take into consideration. So one of the things, pieces of advice I would give, and things that I've learned along the way, or mistakes I've made, is to outsource sooner. In other words, find the people and the resources you need to take on some of the tasks that you don't necessarily need to be doing yourself. One particular area is hiring a virtual assistant to handle your appointments, or making the appointments and doing your intakes for you. That is time and money well spent in terms of hiring someone, training someone. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing that. There are several companies out there that offer virtual assistant services. In fact, shout out to my friend Uriah Guilford at Productive Practice. He's got a ton of resources there about hiring people and being able to outsource in productive and meaningful ways. Also, I'll make sure that we get a link here in the show notes. Uriah put together a directory for mental health providers that covers everything from consultants to virtual assistants to electronic health record systems, but it's a pretty comprehensive directory to help you find those resources that you need. So I'll point you to that and make sure you've got the link here in the show notes. The other thing that I would say that I wish I had done sooner was to not do too much stuff alone. In other words, not get some consulting, not get some coaching earlier on. I tried to figure out too much on my own. Now, again, when I first started back into private practice back in 2005, 2006, there weren't as many folks like me around back then, as far as people that really taught private practice skills and business building and private practice entrepreneurship. There weren't that many of us around. So got a lot more resources there around. But I will say that every time I have invested my time and money into coaching and into consulting with other people that are quote unquote experts in the whole private practice realm, it has pushed the needle forward for me. So if you're interested in doing some consulting with me, I'm available. You can just go to practiceoftherapy.com and just click on the link up there that says start consulting. And there's 3 different ways I do that, or actually 2 different ways. One is in the group context. So I've got 2 different levels of that. I've got the Practice Launch Club, which is really geared towards those people just getting started in private practice. And I have a community of folks, and we get together twice a month to have both office hours and also a mastermind group that's a little bit longer and a little bit more comprehensive. And there's also, connected with the Practice Launch Club, a set of lessons that I put together just around some of the basic skill building on starting a private practice. So that's available for folks. Again, you can find links in the show notes for that. And also the URL is practiceoftherapy.com/practice launch club. And you can find out more about that. The other group that I have is the group practice focus group. I've got the name group in there twice, but anyway, it's the group practice focus group. And that is really specifically for those clinicians that have maybe smaller group practices, but are also insurance based. And so we've got the current cohort has already started. And so I won't be taking enrollment for that till a little later in the year, but you can check into that and reach out to me about that, and I can get you on the wait list for that. But you can, again, you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/focus group to learn more about that. And the other way you can get some help from me is just do some individual consulting with me. And I've got different consulting packages that I offer for people. And with that, what we do is we spend some intensive time together to really define your goals, the areas that you're struggling in, set some key performance indicators of how we're going to change things, what we're going to do differently. KPIs is the acronym for that. But we figure all that out and look at your strengths, areas you need to grow, and put a plan together. And so that's again, I've got a package around that, and you can check that out by going to practiceoftherapy.com and just click on that link that says Start Consulting, and you can find out more about all of that. So the other thing that I will mention here that we've already kind of hit on a little bit is really kind of knowing your financial side better. One of the game changers for me in my practice was, again, a hard lesson I had to learn was when I had hired some contractors, and I had set the fees that I was going to pay them, the contractors, the fee split, so to speak, and not to don't take fee split in the wrong context there, because I know in some of the ethical codes it mentions fee splitting. But what I'm talking about is hiring someone, and your practice collects the fees for the sessions, and then you give to the contractor a percentage of that as their payment for being a contractor with you. That's what I mean by fee splitting, not paying somebody to give you referrals, which is another type of fee splitting that is unethical, and we don't do that. But anyway, with the fee splits that I originally had come up with, quite frankly, the big mistake I made is I came up with the percentage arbitrarily. I just picked a number that I thought sounded fair, thought, okay, I can do this. And so it was a fee split that was way too high. And so when I actually ran the numbers and started doing a deep dive into what my costs were, what I was bringing in, what I was paying out to them, I was having to subsidize that through the clients that I was seeing. And so it was not what they were doing, the contractors were doing, was not making a profit. And so if you don't know this already, you have to make a profit in your practice, and it's okay to make a profit, because that's the only way that you can stay open. And so not only do you need to make a profit as the owner, but also what your clients, what your clinicians, if you're in a group practice, produce also needs to make a profit. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep paying them, and you're not going to be able to keep them on your payroll. So again, knowing your numbers, understanding that whole financial side of things. And one of the resources that I want to point you to here, and there's actually two. One is the book by Mike Michalowicz called Profit First, and it came out probably about 10 years ago, I guess now, and it really kind of was a game changer for me in understanding the power of allocation. In other words, the profit first is exactly what it means, is that you take your profit off the top rather than what is left over at the end. And I'm not going to go into that a whole lot here, but check out the book. And also, coming out in May is Julie Harris's book, Profit First for Therapists. So I would suggest reading Profit First, but if you want to wait till Julie Harris's book comes out in May, it's specifically for therapists, and particularly the types of percentages you need to think about for your practice. And also, Julie goes a lot into the money mindset. And also in that book, she uses me as a case study. So again, learned a lot from my mistakes around how you structure the financial side of your practice. But, one of the things for a lot of us is money is an emotional issue, in that we have certain money mindsets. And I would say the thing that I learned the most is not make financial and money decisions based on emotion. It needs to be made on the data and looking at that. So that was something I learned the hard way, and I don't want you to go about it that way. The other thing too, that whole kind of learning from my mistakes did is it prompted me to put together the course Money Matters in Private Practice. And Julie Harris collaborated with me on that in the updated version, which we're getting ready. Julie and I have already talked about in this year. We're going to update it again. But the original course is out there. It's available, Money Matters in Private Practice, and you can find that at practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. So I would commend that particular course to you. And then the last thing that I would say of things that I've learned along the way is when you start a group practice, make sure you hire the right people, and also set expectations for those people. One story in particular that I'll share with you is I had hired someone, and this has been a few years back. I had hired someone that really came with high recommendations. When I checked out their references and all of that sort of thing, they were well thought of and that sort of thing. But once I got them into the practice and they started working, it was a disaster. And I won't go into a lot of the details around that, but part of it, I blame myself for. A big part of it is that I didn't hold them accountable for some things, and I didn't set the expectations on the front end. I was maybe a little too trusting. I'm a very giving person, which is okay, and that's a good virtue to have, is to be a giving and generous person. But I was overly so with this particular person, and I kept them on way too long, longer than I needed to, and I suffered financially for that. They suffered financially for that, and it just was, I drug it on too long. So setting expectations on the front end with the people you hire, and really defining what it is that they will be doing and how you expect them to do it, and all of that sort of thing goes a long way. And also, I think when you hire somebody, is having a trial period. I know now with the way that I do things is I've got like a 90-day trial period with people to see how they work out. And if they're not working out, it's very clear on the front end that if things aren't working for them and they're not working for the practice, then we need to figure out something different. So again, setting your expectations, not letting problems drag on too long, not burying your head in the sand around things that are happening. I know in my focus groups, what's one of the things that we've been talking about is just what to do when you're having to change things in your practice and having those hard conversations. Well, I think if you set the expectation on the front end that it's okay to have those hard conversations with people, it's going to go better for you in the long run. So again, hiring the right people, setting expectations, and not letting problems go on unchecked once you recognize that they're there. I know for folks that have maybe been listening to the podcast for a while, this is not new information for you, but I think it's always good to revisit these things. First of all, as you always hear from me, know your why around your practice. Know what your lifestyle congruence is. In other words, does your practice match the lifestyle you want to keep, and both across the time that you devote to your practice, but also the income that you're getting from your practice? It needs to all line up for yourself. Also, to being very aware of the financial side of things, of knowing what is profitable, what your breaking even points are, knowing your numbers well goes a long way with having a successful practice. The other thing is making sure you've got the right people and that you're creating a culture within your practice that not only helps people thrive, but also helps your practice thrive. Again, kind of the bottom line is if you're not making a profit in your practice, it's not going to be able to be sustained. And so having some honest conversations with yourself and with others about money in your practice just goes a long way in making your practice successful. The other thing too, and just thinking about the title of this episode, the evolution of private practice and the mistakes I've made. One thing to recognize too is that the way you start out in your practice is probably not going to be the way you keep it going. And again, think of mistakes that you make as learning opportunities rather than getting stuck in the mud with just putting yourself down and getting too buried in the mud, so to speak, around mistakes that you made. Just count them as learning experiences, pick up and keep moving. I think the other thing too, I'll just kind of close out here with this idea around things around the evolution of your practice is be consistent, persistent, and consistent with what you do. I think being able to get into some routines, having the right systems and processes in place, being able to, also know when to, if something's not working, being willing to let go of that. And the other thing too, and I know, sorry, I'm jumping around here, that I needed to mention again and just put some highlights around is knowing when to outsource and not trying to do too much on your own. Not only what you physically do and as far as the time you put into your practice, but also getting the support of others, getting the support of people you outsource to, but also reaching out to others to get some coaching and some help with how you're doing things along the way. Every time I've done that, my practice has grown by reaching out to others, getting some consulting and coaching. Thanks again, folks, for listening to this particular episode. Hope it's been helpful for you. And feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And if you're interested in doing some coaching or taking part in some of the groups that I have or communities that I have, feel free to reach out to me around those things. And also just go to practiceoftherapy.com and you can see all of the resources that I have there. And also before we go, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that has, in my evolution is that podcasting has become very central for me, not only with as an extension of what I do in my practice, but with what I do here at the Practice of Therapy. And it's made such a huge difference in my life and being able to connect with people in very meaningful ways. So I would invite you, if you're interested in starting your own podcast, and I think there's a lot of good reasons for you to do that, I would invite you to take part in the free mini course that we've got out right now from SiteCraft, which is the network that I started this past year. 4 reasons to start your podcast in 2023. And I collaborated with James Marlin on that. And you can sign up for that free email course by going to practiceoftherapy.com/start podcasting, and hope that you'll check that out. And also, before we go, big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. They're the electronic health record system that I use in my practice, and they are a leader in our field in this whole having the resources and the way to manage your practice well, particularly on the clinical side of things. And when you go to that URL, practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, be sure and use the promo code just Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free to give them a kick the tires a little bit, as we like to say. So, but do check them out. They're a wonderful resource, and their support is second to none. So that's it for this episode, folks. Glad you've joined me. As I said before, be sure to take time to follow the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, and take time to subscribe, whichever way it comes up on your podcatcher or wherever you might listen to your podcasts. And big thanks to all of you for taking part of this journey with me. And reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, folks. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.